Show, and at Citizen TV Kenya is the handle. Let me introduce my guest in studio. I'm joined by Willis Misare, a lawyer and political analyst. Welcome to the program. I also have Lawrence Mureithi, who is a civil engineer and a political analyst as well. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Now, yesterday's protest, as you can see, and again we can take a look at the headlines in both papers, the pictures there to be more specific. You can see they were marked with one common denominator. A big percentage of the protesters were young people. And I want to start with you, Willis. So far, what would you say has been the role of the young person in this extended electioneering season that is 2017? Let me start with you, Willis.
Thank you, Maura. To put this into perspective first, when you say that a large segment of perhaps those who are demonstrating are youths, we need to take into consideration the fact that a large segment of the country's population can be classified as youths. As per the Global Competitive Index survey that was released early this year, up to 24 million of the citizens of Kenya fall under the bracket of youths. So it's only natural that during such occurrences, their number will be equally higher as compared to those who fall outside the age bracket described as youths. Now, to go generally into what has been the role of youth in these elections.
Yes, and the impact.
And the impact.
Yes. Having
shown that the youths are the majority in the country, it definitely means that politics, being about, as widely been said, numbers, their numbers would have impacted on who becomes the next leader of this nation.
Okay.
Yes.
Lawrence, I can ask the same question to you. And of course, to you watching at home, talk to us as well. What do you think has been the role and impact of young people in this extended electioneering season that has been 2017? Talk to us, 22422, and on social media as well. But Lawrence, I can ask you the same question.
Thank you, Mahiga. Just to echo what Willis is saying, the numbers clearly indicate that the youths form the majority of the voting bloc. I think also, just to bring a different perspective, is that the youth, the politicians would want to imply that the response is spontaneous with regards to the demonstrations. But I beg to differ. I think it is simply because the youth form the majority of the unemployed segment of the population. It therefore, sort of is without saying, they're the most susceptible to, the politics of what we would call the tumbo politics, which definitely is the direction that the youth really need to evaluate going forward.
Okay. Willis, let me come back to you. In other countries, we see young people leading protests. Let me give you an example. In 2014 in Hong Kong, we saw a movement around the hashtag Occupy Central. Earlier this year in Russia, we saw a move by young people to protest in about 100 cities as well. But in Kenya, it seems that young people only go to the streets when they are urged on by senior politicians or when they are those who they support in senior offices are attacked by others. What does this say about young people in Kenya? Do they have their own agenda, or are they like the proverbial sheep which follow their leaders without questioning what they're really following them for?
I don't think young people follow leaders without questioning what they are following them for. There have been protests in this country, not necessarily with regards to electoral reforms, that have been spearheaded by youth themselves. You've seen, for example, Boniface Mwangi and his movement. When there are certain issues that have affected us as a nation, youth have come out without being called on to by any politician. Now, with regards to politics plays a central role in our lives as citizens, and we cannot run away from it.
Let me interrupt you. And it's good you mentioned Boniface Mwangi. Again, I wish he was here to be part of this discussion, and maybe I should let our viewers know. We were expecting Nerima Wako, Executive Director at Siasa Place, but she couldn't make it. When you look at the protests like the one by Boniface Willis, the numbers there you could say on average are what, 300, 400 protesters. The kind of protests I'm talking about in Hong Kong, in Russia earlier this year, I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of young people pouring out on the streets, seemingly uncoordinated. I don't think we've really seen that in Kenya.
Yeah, I was coming to that now.
Go ahead.
Yeah, with regards to what happens, what motivates people to come out at this point, my friend here mentioned the fact that youths are unemployed in this country. If the leaders, perhaps of what we saw yesterday, of the NASA coalition, gives a message that resonates with the youths, when somebody is jobless and they've lived through the past 5 years in a helpless situation, then any little thing that gives them hope, any message that resonates with them, will bring them out to the streets. Yes, even you look at the number of protesters that comes out during these political protests, they're not as many as the ones you're trying to compare with those other countries.
Okay.
Yeah, though we have to give it in that during political protests, the number are always high. And just to cement on that, it's because I believe that the message that these leaders are passing across resonates with what these youths experience. And that's why they come out, in the hope that if things goes their way, then there's a better tomorrow for them.
Okay, Lawrence, do you agree with Willis?
Absolutely not. I beg to differ and differ strongly, simply because he wants to imply that the response by the youth is spontaneous and that they're in the street simply because the message resonates with that particular demographic. I disagree because it's absolutely clear that these youths are simply, mercenaries on hire.
By who? By both sides? Because we saw
in this case, in this case, I would want to particularly focus on the opposition, because they want to send a message to the electorate that they have a better agenda for the youth, which is actually not the case. We know, and then history proves that yes, there have been movements that have been led by the youth, and the leader of the opposition himself has been very, very, history shows that he's been very vocal on matters of governance, democracy, and the second liberation. But over the years, I think the same leaders have turned their ideologies into their own selfish pursuit, of both power and influence. And I think this is what they're using, because they're selling the message as if they're selling to the youth an ideology, which is actually not the case. The youth need to be informed and enlightened that whatever it is that they're fighting for and being in the streets is simply in pursuit of someone else's agenda.
So you think spontaneous protest by youth in Kenya is unheard of? Is that what you're trying to say?
It is not spontaneous.
It is not spontaneous?
No, it is not. It's definitely choreographed. It's something that is planned, facilitated, of course. And if it was not facilitated, I beg and dare to say that it will probably just be a handful of people on the streets.
Okay, I hope you have proof of this so-called... Did you want to respond, sorry, Willis?
Yeah, I would want to respond to that. I want to dispel the notion that youths are hired to go to these demonstrations. Personally, I've been part of some demonstrations.
That was going to be one of my questions.
Yes, I have been part of demonstrations before. I've had the occasion to interact with these youths. To the extent that these demonstrations are planned, the planning ends at the leader coming out and calling people to the streets, of perhaps saying we need to do this. We saw what happened yesterday. We saw the protests in Kisumu. We saw the protests in Nairobi. These leaders themselves were not there. And I think our friends in Jubilee now have to have a single narrative. You cannot be talking of a broke opposition and you still talk of them paying youths to go to the streets. Where do they get the money to pay these youths? These people are told, look, for us to have a free and fair election that's going to give us the government we want, that's going to solve some of our problems, we need to push these people out. And since they've refused to heed our calls to step aside, we think that by demonstrating, we'll perhaps send a stronger message. And if people come out, nobody picks them from their homes, like our friends usually do. Yeah, they come to the streets, demonstrate, then go back without any pay on their part. If they pay their youth, then I would like to say that that does not happen on the other side of the political divide.
Okay. Let me see if we can move this discussion forward. Do you think the young people that you're seeing on your screen, and again, I know none of you can predict the future, do you think they eventually benefit from their efforts? And I'm talking about, and yesterday we saw youth from both sides of the political divide on the streets. Lawrence?
Like I've said before, and I'll put this in quotes, what they're doing is that they're just pushing for an agenda for just a few elite principles, what I would call tumbo politics. And it's unfortunate because they actually don't realize that and the principles they're using are taking advantage of the fact that these youths are unemployed, they are hopeless, and so they sell to them a narrative that eventually puts them on the street. I don't think they realize what it is that the particular cause they're fighting for. If for instance, and I would challenge even those who cover such events, sample a few of those people on the streets and ask them what it is that they're on the streets demonstrating against. And
they were very clear.
They were demonstrating against, of course, the removal of the CEO of IBC and a few other officials. Ask them what it is that those officials have been accused for and the reason for them fighting for their removal. They would have absolutely no idea.
Are you okay? Well, they're not here for us to ask them. What's your take, Lawrence? Because you clearly seem to have a view on one set of the protesters that were there. What's your take on this other group? They're calling themselves Nairobi business leaders, and we also saw them on the streets. Do they also have an agenda? Are they also being sponsored by someone? What would you say about that other group?
I wouldn't say they're sponsored, because they've clearly come out saying they're businessmen of Nairobi and they are concerned parties. We know, and history is very, very clear, that whenever this opposition calls for demonstrations, we end up having loss of property, motorists getting harassed, we end up getting property vandalized, women harassed on the streets. And so these are only a segment of the concerned residents of Nairobi.
Are you being fair though? One group you're calling concerned, others you're saying are sponsored. How are you drawing the line between who is a concerned? Because even those who are protesting outside IEBC headquarters, that's part of their constitutional right.
It is, and but those rights have also to be enjoyed in the larger perspective, considering that also the other citizens who have to access their businesses, who have to move around, who have also a right to guard their properties, have a right to guard their lives, have a right to safe, secure movement within and around the city.
Okay, let me bring Willis into this. Let me allow him to respond. Then Willis, I have another question I can ask you after this.
Let me respond to just two issues. One is the issue of Nairobi businessmen, and two is the issue of do these youths gain at the end of the day.
Yes.
One, I'd like to say that there's nothing business-like about the people who came out to say that they're business owners in Nairobi. There's more to business than perhaps having a small kiosk in Nairobi. Business is such a larger picture, right? And if there's anybody who has really messed business in this country, I think it's those who influenced the IEBC to mess with our elections. So one, those people are not businessmen. They are thugs, and we have to call them what they are. And they are sponsored to particularly take on the NASA protesters, who I think have a very legitimate concern. The second thing that you've raised is, do these youths personally benefit from this protest?
Yeah, in the grand scheme of things.
In the grand scheme of things.
Yes.
And I think I hold a very different view on that, Mwaura. As a country, we must stop being selfish. We don't have to look what is in for me at the end of the day. The bigger question should be, what is in it for the entire country at the end of the day? If I take part in these protests and perhaps lose a limb or get tear gassed, but then at the end of the day, the reforms that come as a result of this protest gives us a better electoral process, that as a country, the next time we hold elections, the results are declared, and the next day we move on with business as usual, then I will have gained in the bigger picture. I don't have to look at what comes to my pocket or what comes to my family. So this is something that's afflicting mostly the youths and everybody else in society. You don't have to look at what is in it for me as a person. If we forgot that and started to look at what is in it for us as a country, what is in it at the end of the day, what's the bigger picture here, then I think the youths have a concern, have a legitimate cause to be on the streets. Okay,
let me see what people are saying on social media, talking to us on 22422, 2 SMSs here. Hi Citizen TV, my views are as follows. I do not like the way police were handling the protesters. I would like them to use rubber something, not their wooden rungus. Okay. Another person here, you don't give us your name, but say the youth are hired by politicians. Each of them are paid for the day's work. They have no agenda. Most are unemployed. Of course, keep sending us your feedback, 22422. Talk to us also on our social media platforms, and I will read some of the other feedback or more feedback that you've sent in, later on in this broadcast. I want to read you, gentlemen, a quote from an international magazine called The Wire about youth and politics across the world, and it reads as follows. With youth participation in elections waning, basically there are fewer young people participating in elections across the world, they are being increasingly disregarded in the political system. But if young people voted, they could change the results. One example is Brexit, the situation that happened in the United Kingdom recently, where young people did not vote, but thereafter went on the streets to protest when the pro-Brexit team won. What parallels can we draw from that, those thoughts by the writers of that column? And Kenya, are we seeing a situation where young people maybe do not participate in the run-up to the polls as much, but are the ones that you'll mainly see poured out onto the streets, protesting various issues, Lawrence?
Maura, allow me to react to the comment that you just read regarding the use of force by the police. And I want to just state here that the opposition brigade said clearly that the protests, the demonstrations, they would come out in large numbers and forcefully evict the CEO of IBC together with I think 10 other officials. Now, there's nothing in that statement that demonstrates that the petitioners, or rather the demonstration would have been peaceful. And so the police, of course, to be fair to them, have to sort of meet those demonstrations with the rightful and appropriate amount of force.
Do you think they could have handled yesterday's situation differently in Nairobi? I know in Kisumu the police have been applauded for not using force, but in Nairobi, do you think,
yes.
Lawrence, this is to you, do you think they could have done anything differently yesterday?
In Kisumu, they had actually no grievance against any one of the officials within IBC, and so no one was at risk per se. Here, they had clearly said that they were coming out in large numbers to forcefully evict the CEO along with 10 of his other officials. And so it's very, very clear that the intentions were not, soft in any, so to speak. And so the police, of course, had to come out and use appropriate measures to restrain them.
If you might allow me to interject, I think that's playing nice and not saying what's happening. Chiloba does not work on the ground floor of Anniversary Towers. Anniversary Towers is fenced off. It was enough for the police to cordon off Anniversary Towers and let the protesters protest on the streets. One thing we have to clearly state is that protests in this country are always very peaceful until the police overstep their mandate. Perhaps you just gathered into protest.
Do you feel they overstepped their mandate yesterday?
Yesterday, because I wasn't part of yesterday's demonstrations, but throwing tear gas at people who are not within Anniversary Towers, who are still outside the confines of Anniversary Towers, they are not going to evict Chiloba on the streets. If somebody was to evict Chiloba, then he had to go inside Anniversary Towers. There was
a worry that the two group of youths that were outside Anniversary Towers would clash, and one school of thought is that the police intervened. As you can see on the screen there, those two groups of youth, one chanting Chiloba must go, another one of the so-called Nairobi business leaders who are saying that they need to protect their property, and that if those two groups had met, the situation might have been worse. How would you respond to that, Willis?
We get that concern, and at that point then the police have a legitimate responsibility. They come in, but in what way do they come in? We see police cordoning off, marking off areas. Yeah, we say this side of the street belongs to these protesters, this other side of the street is for these protesters. They can chant all day long and people will walk away peacefully. And I think our friends from Jubilee need to, I don't know whether I should say grow up, because the last time they were protesting at the Supreme Court, it's not like people from NASA did not have concerns or would not go to protest in support of the court, but they were given the chance. They went, they protested the first day, and on the day of the ruling we saw it's the bees that took them away, not NASA supporters of the police. So if people organize demonstrations, let them have their demonstrations in coordination with the police as they ought to. If you have your demonstrations, do have your demonstrations. Do not come out to counter another group that is demonstrating, because that's bound to turn violent. And the worst bit of it, and I saw from some people I've really had respect for, making such comments on social media that they even now ask the police to step aside and let these demonstrations be contained by the so-called Nairobi Business Owners Association, which, like I've said before, are not business owners but thugs.
That is what you believe they are? Yeah. Okay, they're not here to defend themselves, so I will not allow that conversation to continue. And of course, social media, something interesting that you've raised, Willis. That is something we'll be talking about on the other side of this break. But for now, we take a short break. Let me read two SMSs here. Thank you so much, everyone writing in. Another person who does not give us their name or where they're writing from says, talk the truth. Those people, I think those are protesting, are working for someone, but some of them do not know who. And Wanjohi in Nyanyuki says, Jambo, we have prayed for our leaders for very long. This seems not to help. It is high time Raila and Uhuru are told that we have a life to live and the future of our children. They mustn't put this beautiful country into the drain with their drama. We'll take a short break. You're watching the Power Breakfast Show live on Citizen TV. We carry on with this discussion, and I also read more of your feedback on the other side of this break.